So I'm a self-confessed fire nerd. I love fire. Fascinated by fire. I think it's an amazing ecosystem process. It's absolutely beautiful to watch. It's beautiful to see the results after. It's such an amazing thing to bear witness to. I took this photo, and you can see this is up in northern Banff National Park last summer. And you can see, actually a friend of mine took the photo, but you can see really how stunning the landscape fire can actually occur in. At the same time, I'm standing about 3 kilometers from a hotel with 200 guests in it. So you can imagine, while I'm in awe of the beauty and I'm thinking about the results that this amazing disturbance is going to have on the landscape, I'm also very concerned about the values that are potentially at threat. And so as we manage fire, that's really the paradox for us. And Laurie alluded to that a little bit. That's the challenge. How do we take these two things that are at opposite ends of spectrums and come up with a management solution? How do we win in both categories? And that's where, in the last 5 to 7 years in Parks Canada, we've been working with this management strategy of managing fire with fire. And that's what I'm going to talk about this evening. I should start with a bit of a caveat. In Parks Canada, we are blessed with a slightly different suite of values at risk than our provincial counterparts, our provincial neighbors like British Columbia are. We do not have the same values at risk. We do not have a timber value. We do not have homes scattered throughout our national parks. We do not have mining. We do certainly have values at risk. We have places like Lake Louise and the Chateau Lake Louise. We have the Trans-Canada Highway, CP Rail, major highway systems that move through. We do not have the same number of values, and that affords us an opportunity to manage fire in a slightly different way than, say, our neighbor, either our neighbors, Alberta or British Columbia, would. Our roots are very similar. We started with a fire management program very similar to provincial agencies. We are still quite good at putting fires out, very similar in terms of how we do it. The last 60 to 70 years, we've been very effective at removing fire from fire-dependent ecosystems across our Rocky Mountain National Parks. We know that's left a legacy. We know those ecosystems were dominant, or the dominant disturbances in those ecosystems was fire. By removing that, we've left a legacy. We're working now to sort of come back from that legacy that we've left. We also know that as part of the fire suppression era, we lost, Laurie quoted 92%. When we lose those fires from initial attack, we lose them usually on the worst days, the hottest days, the driest days, the windiest days. And we see fires that we think are outside of the range of historic variability, fires that are burning hotter, faster, and leaving very little fire refugia or very little heterogeneity in the fire itself. This is an example from 2003 in central Coutney National Park. Burned from valley bottom to mountaintop all the way to tree line almost extensively. Very few patches or fire refugia left behind in the wake of the fire. We also know in our Rocky Mountain National Parks we have some iconic keystone species that are very fire dependent. This is a Rocky Mountain bighorn sheep, blue listed in British Columbia, loves open Douglas fir forests, needs to be able to see predators when it's sneaking up on them. If I was a bighorn sheep, I would want to see if a cougar was sneaking up on me as well. Without fire, those Douglas fir forests have turned into closed Douglas fir forests. The sheep can no longer see predators. They don't feel comfortable anymore. They've moved down onto the golf courses in the neighboring towns. We've got our high elevation, federally listed species at risk, white bark pine. Really neat relationship with the Clark's nutcracker and also a strong relationship with fire. Clark's nutcracker likes to cache in fire-created openings. They prefer to cache in the openings. White bark pine is an early successional species. When fire comes through in those high elevation forests, it resets that successional pathway. It opens it up. It removes white bark pine competitors, the shade-tolerant Engelmann spruce, subalpine fir. White bark pine, all of a sudden, again, as a sun-loving species, has a competitive advantage. So without fire, we've impacted those species. And our iconic grizzly bear. Grizzly bears rely heavily on berry crops, vaccinium, grouseberry, huckleberry, blueberry. They need those high caloric foods in order to survive hibernation. The amount of berry crop they get through the year, through the summer, is strongly linked to how many cubs a sow will have the year following. The berries really are the salmon of the interior forest for our bears. And without fire, we don't see the same berry crops. The berries need the fire to come through, clean off that forest canopy, get the sunlight down onto the forest ground, and produce the berry crops. So we've got Fire suppression has impacted the amount of fire we've seen in our Rocky Mountain National Parks. Fire suppression has also resulted in what we think are different fires occurring on our landscapes. We've got numerous species that are highly dependent on fire in terms of an ecosystem process, creating habitat, changing the successional pathway. And we also got values embedded both within the park and external to the park on our neighboring provincial lands. How do we manage the two ends of those spectrum? So I'm going to zoom in on Coutney National Park. Coutney's located down in the southeastern corner of British Columbia, tucked right up against the Continental Divide. It's the small cousin to Banff and Jasper National Parks, although respectively we get more fire than they do. Very active lightning belt that moves through there. We spent a lot of effort in the last 10 years working to understand the fire regime for Coutney National Park. And we feel like we've got a good handle on that. And we think we understand things like the severity, the size, the intensity of past wildfires in Coutney National Park. We've got species like, forest types like open Douglas fir lodgepole pine, Engelmann spruce subalpine fir, and even whitebark pine and limber pine. These conifers are highly adapted to ecosystems that Laurie alluded to. So how do we manage that? And how do we manage that with fire if that's our goal? How do we get more naturally occurring wildfires on the landscape? How do we provide for that disturbance in a way that doesn't threaten our values? So what we've done in Coutney National Park, this is a shot of Coutney National Park. We've gone in and we've looked at where are the values in Coutney. Internally to the park, we can mitigate the risk to those values using strategies like Fire Smart. Removing fuels around structures. We did an extensive fire smarting project around Lake Louise, Chateau Lake Louise. But what about the values to our neighboring lands? We wouldn't be a good neighbor for very long if every summer we sent wildfires off of Coutney National Park and into the province. And that really was the biggest head scratcher for us. How do we address that threat? How can we get wildfires on our landscape, manage wildfires, but wildfires that are allowed to burn on their own, but not send a fire every summer into the province? We certainly wouldn't be good neighbors for long. So we looked at our landscape and we came up with these strategic prescribed fires, and we put them in places where it was the greatest likelihood for fires to escape. We went in and we burned these prescribed fires, these capping units as we call them, so that future fires that started from lightning, these wildfires that we wanted to allow to occur on the landscape, that were upwind and up valley of our prescribed fires, when they burned towards our prescribed fire, they would either stop or slow down to the extent that we could suppress them. This allowed us to zone our landscape in such a way that we could have pieces of the park where we allowed wildfire. So Coutney National Park is 140,000 hectares in size. We've got a small area down on the lower left that's red. That's our full suppression zone. That extends about 10 to 15 kilometers from the community of Radium Hot Springs. No questions asked. We're going to go in there. We're going to put wildfires out. There really is no good break from fires if we let them be there. So no questions asked. That's a full suppression. Yellow and green, those are what we call our wildfire management zones. Those are places where if we get a lightning fire at the right time of year, with the right resources available, the right money available, we'll allow that fire to burn as uninterrupted as we possibly can. We will interfere as little as possible. We will only interfere when we believe that it becomes a threat to our values at risk. And remember, we do have values in the park. We do have a major highway system that runs right down the middle. It connects Calgary, Alberta to the Columbia Valley, very popular tourist destination. So I'm going to give you a couple examples of where we've been successful with this. This is 2012. This is the Octopus Mountain wildfire. This image is taken from that highway I just spoke about. This fire started in early August. This fire really successful. It was a partnership between Parks Canada, BC Provincial Parks. This burned partially into Mount Assiniboine Provincial Park, and BC Wildfire Management Branch. Final size, just over 800 hectares, and we didn't do anything. We managed it, we watched it, but we didn't touch it. We drew a box around it. That box was our line in the sand. If the fire moved out of that box, we would have taken action to contain it. Most likely, we would have used ignition to contain it, but we didn't have to do that. And what it did, it really surprised us. So each of these colors is a fire spread day. Orange and the yellow, that's early August. That's the initial fire spread. That's the initial growth after the fire. After that, it took 15 mils of rain, and it sat all the way to early September. Early September, dried out again, up it got, burned the blue colors. We were surprised. Wow, here we go, this thing is still alive. Rained again, early October, and we're in the Rocky Mountains. October, we typically have snow. This thing got back up and burned that purple section in October. Absolutely blew us away in terms of how it wanted to burn. The purple piece was actually on a northeast aspect, cooler, moister, not a spot we would have ever expected to actually have burned. So not only has this wildfire gotten us some heterogeneity on the landscape as a whole that Laurie alluded to, breaking up that even-aged, mature lodgepole pine forest, but within the fire itself, incredible heterogeneity. And that's what we're really excited about from a species and habitat creation perspective, is this variability within the fire itself. The fact that it really just did a whole bunch of different things. My second example here is the Numa Creek wildfire. This is from 2013. This fire is right adjacent to the major highway corridor through Coutney National Park, but early August as well, and a place we really wanted to see some more fire on the landscape. And so we let this fire burn. We managed it. We drew some lines where we wanted to contain it. Those lines were a little tighter than they were with the octopus fire. The red line is an avalanche path that we wanted to hold it on to keep it from burning towards the highway. It burned 4 or 5 days before it made a major run towards this avalanche path. And then we used aerial ignition. That's the stuff you can see in the lower left, the large amount of flame you can see lower left. We're using that aerial ignition to not only try and contain the fire, but to get fire back on the landscape. So we're expanding the fire in a way that we think mimics the ecological process, but also is providing us opportunity to contain it. So what we're trying to do as we ignite that fire is to create a convective column, create that heat draw that's going to draw the fire into it from the avalanche path. And that's what you can see it's done. It's pulled that convective column from the avalanche path that was going the other way with the wind. The heat from our ignition has drawn the fire into itself, and now we can light right along that avalanche path and contain and hold the fire there. So it's a win in terms of values at risk, it's a win in terms of ecological process, and we got a bunch more fire on the landscape as a result. This is a picture I took just a few days ago. This is in the Numa Creek wildfire, the last one I just showed you an example of. This is, we're planting some white bark pine seedlings. We hope that these seedlings are resistant to the white pine blister rust, the invasive pathogen that's been wiping out white bark pine. So not only has this wildfire created that heterogeneity on the landscape, it's also created an opportunity for us to go in and plant a species at risk in hopes of recovering it in the future. Right next to the white bark pine, you can see some vaccinium. There's our future berry crops coming in, that habitat for those bears that we were talking about. So really good opportunities in all aspects from a managed wildfire. I'll leave you with this picture. This is a classic photo taken in one of our wildfires in North Coutney National Park. This is a visitor standing in one of the older fires. She's got fireweed all around her, and often thought of as a disturbance, as ugly, as not as beautiful when you speak in terms of a national park. We find a lot of our visitors now are super excited to go out and hike in old fires. They find it an absolutely fascinating ecosystem to walk through. It's very stunning. And in Parks Canada, with our integrated mandate, that's one thing that we're really excited about, is teaching Canadians about fire as a process and how fire is important on the landscape and what we're achieving when we do things like managing fire with fire. I'll leave it at that.